Good morning, Ardor Next group, or evening, wherever you are in the world. We are celebrating our last day here of Ardor Days. Crypto woman here, known as Elizabeth, with John McLeod. Hi, John.
Hi, Elizabeth. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me on your show.
Well, I'm really excited to have you on the show, to introduce you to the community in a little bit more of a personal way. Um, you are an important person behind the scenes, and I'd like you to step out a little bit and tell us about yourself and what you do for the community. First of all, let us get to know you a little bit better.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. So I've been working in public relations for about 10 years now. I set up my own agency 2 years ago in November 2015. Basically, my background was in financial services, working with asset management, pension funds, banks, private equity. But I always felt it was ridiculous that it took 3 working days to transfer money between accounts using this network that's decades old. I wanted an agency that understood how digitalization was really changing the way financial services could operate and could change. So that's why I set up on my own. And I was really impressed with the NXT community and NXT technology. Although sort of Bitcoin and Ethereum were sort of most well known, the technology was just so advanced with proof of stake, and I really felt that was important that was communicated. And so for just over 2 years now, I've been working with the team, mainly Bas Wisselink and Dave Pearce, but also now some others, which is really exciting. And we've had some real success sort of promoting the NXT community and its technology with the mainstream media and also the crypto and trade media.
Wonderful. Yes. How did you find NXT?
Yeah, so in the summer of 2015, I was advising on a project that used the NXT technology, and I was very impressed with that. And I asked if I could be introduced, and I spoke to the team and gave them some examples of the work I've done, and was really keen to work with them in the future. So yeah, we hit it off with Bas and Dave, and we haven't looked back since then.
Right, right. So you've been part of the team working there quietly behind the scenes, and we have to ask, and this is an opportunity for you to help us understand the process of how a story gets created and delivered and adopted and distributed, because there's a lot of people that wonder why we don't get more press coverage. And you're an expert, so why don't you explain to us a little bit about how that happens?
Yeah, I mean, Elizabeth, it's quite, we really have a job to educate our clients because a lot of these people are very sort of technology engineering focused, and it's very much the literal, do the job, this is important for X, Y, and Z. But you have to really, to do this job, you have to understand how a journalist thinks, what adds color to a story, what's of interest, how is this technology applied, what can it be used for, how is it relatable to everyday people's lives? And so that's, we've had some real success, explaining that with sort of the trade media and other journalists, but it's talking to them and explaining to them, it's not just, explaining the difference between proof of work and proof of stake and why that's important. What's of interest to journalists would be the excessive energy usage of Bitcoin and how that's the equivalent to a country like Denmark. And that's just not sustainable or scalable, whereas the proof of stake that NXT uses is much less. Is how you sort of visually create a sort of visual image that can be used for a journalist to create a story that sort of captures people's imagination. And that's what you and I have to do. We have to sort of read the information, read that data, and see how does that relate to people? How's that of interest? How does that something, let's be honest, seemingly dry as sort of blockchain architecture, and how that can be applied to sort of banks and financial service providers. It's there. The stories are there, and we have had real success explaining to journalists, how could sort of pension fund industry or asset management industry improve its transparency and accountability by using blockchain instead of having so many different layers. It can all be done with NXT technology, with phasing transactions and so on. So the stories are there, and we have had success, but it's explaining to people with a very sort of technological sort of literal background, how we create a sort of live story and how we actually sort of add color and sort of structure a story that's going to be of interest to journalists so that they write up. But we have built up, I'm very proud that for the last couple of years, we really have got some very loyal journalists who follow us and are really interested and really believe in NXT. And, that's something we've done. But it is, as you say, it's very hard to sort of generate that interest when it's actually a very sort of technical, with not that many so far use cases to sort of demonstrate the technology. So that's also another problem we have, as you know, with NXT. I mean, it can be used for so many different things. It's not like Ethereum smart contract or Bitcoin, just a sort of transfer of value that's very easy to understand. NXT can be applied to a whole range of different business situations and scenarios, which is really exciting. But at the same time, it's almost too much. And I sort of focus in and just make it more sort of comprehensible for journalists is something we have to do as well. So.
Well, we've heard the term blockchain as a service now.
Yeah.
Recently. And that's nice because I think that can help give us a little bit of a focus or a label to get under. But we've heard a lot of interesting use cases over the last few days. I'm really excited for this.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm going to break it down a little bit more and ask you some things a little bit more specifically, just so that we have an understanding of your world. So you mentioned you have a following of journalists. How does that happen? Is it the responsibility of a PR person to establish relationships with journalists? Is that how it works?
Yes, I mean, I really know this area and this space, and I read about it avidly, and I know which journalists are writing. A lot of these journalists I know and talk to, and they say, John, we're looking to talk about how central banks can create a digital currency. Can you, get some commentary on that very quickly? And, it's great. We have people who can. So it's just developing those relationships that I've done, and I've maintained those. And, it's really exciting for me as well, because more and more journalists are beginning to get a greater awareness of blockchain technology and how it can be applied. So, I mean, 2 years ago, everyone was like, blockchain, what's blockchain? I've heard of Bitcoin, but, what is it? Now you see it in the Financial Times, you see it in all the mainstream papers and magazines. So that's really exciting. At the same time, there's been a huge boom as well. I mean, it's a very crowded space. We all really believe in NXT technology. It's sustainable and it's been around and it's going to be around for the future. So how we sort of cut through this noise.
Okay, and then could you walk us through the lifetime of a press release?
Yeah, so it's one of those funny things. I was always told, oh, you've got a real gift for writing. You really write very well at school and university. And then when I was working at a big city agency, I worked with a former Reuters journalist who was Texan and very blunt. Said, John, you don't know anything about writing. As a journalist, and this is at Reuters, press release, you've got to grab the attention. You have to accept that journalists receive hundreds of emails, press releases a day. It's who, what, why, where, when, how. And you've got to get that in the sort of, at least if not the headline, then the first paragraph and the bullet points. And that's always how I've approached my press releases with NXT and all my clients. And it's very well, I think, actually, just who, what, why, when, how. Why is this relevant? What's the story? When's it happening? How's it going to happen? Why is this relevant? Those are the questions that we have to answer with the press release. And, it does help. I mean, in the early days, it was a very sort of, we're going to do this now. Here's a release. I'm like, no, guys, this has to be properly edited and structured. And could you put me through and give me a briefing? But it is a process. And I'm glad it's really improved actually in the last couple of years. So that's very basically how a press release comes together and just understanding what's going to be of interest to a journalist. And once we have that press release, I can say, oh, this will be of interest to this kind of journalist or a journalist writing about this sector and how it can be applied. So that's put very simply and briefly how a press release works, who, what, why, when, how, and, just keep it succinct, structured, easy to read. These journalists get a lot. So you really have to be very focused on the press release and make sure it's very clear.
But even having done your very best job, it really is still up to that journalist to decide whether that press release is of interest in that time and in that space to their audience, correct? And so they may choose to use it or not. So I think that's the part of it that's out of our control, right?
So much in this job is out of, you don't know if there's going to be like an oil spill or a market crash or the bond market's good. There's only so much and there's only so much space you can develop. But there is a real interest. But as you say, there's so many factors beyond our control in public relations. We can only package what we have as efficiently as well as we can. And, it's a process. It takes time, and often I've had journalists use material that we gave them months ago. Just because then it's yes, I remember talking to Pastor Dave or whoever, and this is how we can use it for this particular story. So it doesn't always happen like the next day like they expect, and doesn't. Sometimes it's like this is of interest, but I can't quite fit it in, and a journalist is only going to use what's relevant to him or her and what they interest to them. So that's another frustration. A lot of people don't understand the media and just how journalists only write if it's relevant or of use to them. There's only so much we can offer and do.
Right, but content, generated content, is really the best way to get our story out. I believe even better than ads. So
Yeah.
keep doing your good work, and hopefully our stories will become more relevant as we're introducing more use cases, more applications, and we actually have people now who are building projects on our blockchains, and so that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, no, it's really exciting.
But as amazing as we think that is, as excited as I get about it, I have to realize that it's still a story that's out of my control, because it has to be amazing and relevant to somebody else who makes the decision to print it or not, correct?
Yeah.
Exactly. So, wow. So was that your first introduction to blockchain, was through the NXT community?
Yes, I've read about sort of Bitcoin, but it's I did some sort of freelance work in the summer of 2015 for a blockchain project, and then I really started thinking this is really exciting, and digitalization, how it's changing so many industries, not just financial services, but sort of retail, telephones, telecommunications, so many areas are changing so quickly through digitalization and blockchain technology. I really wanted an agency that understood that, and it's a very exciting time, and I've just learned so much in the last 2 years, and I'd like,
So has your enthusiasm grown in the past couple of years?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've never been so happy at work, and it's a great community. It's very informal. It's really sort of roll up your sleeves and get the job done. I really like that as well.
Yeah, that is good. I did want to also say one more thing about press releases and stories and things like that. There are some popular magazines or online venues to distribute news stories that we're all aware of that cover this crypto scene. Do you want to tell us why we aren't in there a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, people talk about paid for content, and I always said absolutely not, no way. There's no credibility to that. We generate the stories, we make it interesting to journalists, and that gives you much more credibility when you see something written by a journalist through their own sort of volition, because they're so impressed by what you have to say, not just by handing over money. I mean, advertising is one area, but public relations gives you way more credibility, and it's harder work, but that's what we're here to do. We're here to sort of give credibility to the product and the services you provide, and make sure people, incredible news sources from the FT, The Economist. Also, don't underestimate the trade media. I mean, a lot of people read Euro Money or International Business Times or sort of Crypto Coin News or whatever it might be. But when they see that, sort of written, it really does have credibility. But when they see something which is just so advertorial, which is all about how great we are and how we've done this, and then they see this is a paid for content, I mean, you might as well just put an advert up saying, with a celebrity and something. It doesn't have the same credibility, and I've always said that. And it takes time to develop a story. It takes briefings, it takes a lot of thought, it takes research, it takes data, and how you then craft a story from that. This is relevant because of X, Y, and Z. That takes a lot of work.
Right.
Worth it, and it really does add credibility. And that's how I've always approached things. That said, I have advised a number of ICOs in 2017, and in some cases we have paid for content in the trade magazines, the sort of crypto coin trade magazines, and it does have its purpose. A lot of people, investors, do read those. So I have slightly bended my views on that one, but I've always said no, we don't pay for it. I'm here, you're paying me. Now, develop a story.
And credibility is a really, really important character that we want to develop for the long game, isn't it?
Yeah. Exactly that.
And this is the long game. I mean, we've been in this project for 4 years now.
Yeah.
We're coming up to a really pivotal point here with this upcoming launch of the Genesis block of Ardor, but it's only the beginning. You know,
Yeah.
we're going far into the future. So where do you see the future taking us? Or I mean, how do you see us going into the future? Let's phrase that differently.
Yeah, I think I'm really excited by blockchain technology and how it can be applied to so many different areas. For me, I mean, I can go on and on about how blockchain can be applied to so many areas, but in the city, when I worked for major banks and sort of pension funds, I mean, the legacy issues at banks are just ridiculous. I mean, these IT systems going back to the 70s are still being used.
Oh, wow.
The amount of money they waste, how information can be just put on a single immutable ledger, and how that can just be clear for all to see. I think it could revolutionize banking. I really do see it. And more of the big blue chip names are sort of beginning to look into private blockchains and sort of that kind of area. I think for digital identity as well, I think, people could actually control their own digital identity because, with Facebook, with Twitter, with so many areas, Amazon, we just pass on information blindly. And, people just don't understand that information is being monetized and used by big search engines to sort of generate advertising revenues. And data is money, and people are going to, I think, become more aware. Like, I don't want my friendships, I don't want my search engine history to then be used as some kind of product. I think there's a growing consensus, and I think how you create a digital identity that controls how you disperse information is a really interesting area over the next 5 to 10 years. I mean, so many areas like sort of pensions and savings. The pensions industry in this country is built on the idea that you have one job for life, and that you just have one pension fund and you just put it in, and at the end of 30 years you get your pension. It's like, no, you have like several careers, let alone several jobs in your career, and you have many different pensions. But wouldn't it be great to put them on one blockchain so you can see, and then you can see the management fees and how much the management are doing for these fees, and what the transparency is for how you manage your pension funds, and all the other different sort of layers of performance fees that just people don't understand, or what they're getting for it. And if you had that on a blockchain, they could see very clearly. So I think transparency in financial services is a really exciting area with blockchain for me. But so many areas, I think, sort of so many service industries, accountancy could be transformed through blockchain. So many areas of accountancy, it just lends itself to that. Phased transactions, I think they could be so important, for sort of, when people sort of like sign a deal or a contract, payment can be made when certain parameters have been reached. That's an area I think that could really transfer the way transactions and transaction services are carried out. So, the possibilities are limitless over the next 5-10 years, and I'm really excited by that. I could go on and on and on, Elizabeth. But
I know, isn't it amazing? When you talk about having all your pensions in one place, sometimes when I think about blockchain, I think, wouldn't it be cool if we all had our own individual one, especially when we start getting the intercommunication between blockchains down
yeah.
But I would love to have all my information. I mean, by the time you're my age and you've lived all those places and had all those doctors and all those certificates, I don't even know where they all are. Have them all in one place. So I think that the future is endless. John, I hope we get to see you around a little bit more in the community. I know you're busy writing your words on our behalf. Jump into the conversation a little bit more, because you have very valuable things to contribute.
Absolutely, and I like to see myself as a resource for the NXT community and Ardor community. And going forward, we've had some real successes I'm very proud of for the last 2 years, but there's so much more. And as I've always said to my clients, I'm only as good as my brief. And the more interaction I have with you, the more information, the more data, the more I've got this idea, or this could be applied for this. Perhaps we could talk about how this hedge fund is using blockchain to sort of pass on sort of funds to its clients and so on, and transparent. Just anything, just please get in touch. It really helps me, because I'm only as good as my brief, and just knowing what's going on behind the scenes really helps me. And, I've got, the data, I've got the resources, I've got the journalists, I've got the connections. I really can. And we could really, really push the NXT community and Ardor technology in 2018 and forwards. Really exciting.
And we are going to do that. And we're happy to have you helping us.
Great.
I hope you have a really happy New Year, and we will.
Pleasure talking, Elizabeth. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, John. Bye.
Bye.